Hi, I'm LadyJenevia. Let's get into today's video topic, which is Dickinson episode 6 with spoilers. If you didn't watch my spoiler-free review of this episode that I posted last week, please go watch that first because I don't want to explain the basics of La Traviata again. But that's more relevant to the material we're going to be talking about later in this review. First of all, I want to talk about the giant elephant in the room. Emily writing a letter to Sam Bowles' wife. Here's the thing. The first time I watched Dickinson season 2, when I saw the end of episode 5, my takeaway was that Emily was developing a bit of an attraction to Sam Bowles, but also that what I was seeing wasn't really real. The show often goes on these really artistic tangents. They're not afraid to get surreal with their storytelling style. You have seen Emily on more than one occasion talking to Death, who is played by Wiz Khalifa. That doesn't mean that she is really talking to Death. So when Emily went to the opera with her family and ended up sitting in Sam's nice fancy box with him, and he says, "Emily, we have a problem," and then he scolds her for sending a letter to his wife, a letter that made Sam and his wife feel extremely uncomfortable. It's the reason she's not here tonight. She refused to come because your letter made her feel so violated. You wrote the craziest in that letter. I was mortified. I experienced the most visceral, second-hand embarrassment, and I was not even the one who wrote that letter. That's just how I am as a person. It's very easy for me to get second-hand embarrassment, which is why I like to remove myself from situations where I think that's going to happen. It never occurred to me when I watched the end of episode 5 that Emily was actually going to send that letter. I thought it was just more of that abstract storytelling and that we were using metaphors. Her words were just her internal monologue. Emily. He's married. You cannot do that. But also, I felt so bad for Emily when I was watching this episode 6 for the first time, because we know, as the audience, we know that Emily did not mean any harm by it. She says it in the episode. Sometimes when I'm writing, I lose control. The show has very clearly communicated who Emily Dickinson is. She is really extra. She is over the top. Her mind races. Her words come shooting out of her like molten lava. Also, think back in your life. Have you ever accidentally misread social cues and had it blow up in your face? It's the worst feeling, right? Oh my God, we all need to just take a moment to breathe and recover from how embarrassing this entire situation is. So at this point in the show, they've been doing this with Sam, where you can't really tell what his deal is, what his intentions are. Is he a good guy, a bad guy? Can he be trusted? A lot of the men on this show are at least a little bit sexist. It's the 1800s after all. The show usually gives room for all of its characters to be flawed in some way though, to be fair. When I watched this episode, it felt like we were finally getting some more information about Sam, because usually when he's showing up, he's just there to talk to Emily about her poems. The conversation isn't usually about him. But wow, they sure decided to make it as dramatic as possible. I was stressed beyond belief when I watched this episode for the first time. And in particular, the parts where they were interacting with each other up in that box, I was so embarrassed and anxious. It's like every time I've ever been in the presence of a highly attractive person. I don't need that type of stress. Just leave me alone to hang out with my cat, sleeping next to me while I read 20K words on AO3. Okay. One other detail I will mention about Sam, though, is that when they showed Sam for the first time in this episode, they did another slow motion musical entrance, which I found to be a really nice choice, because even though he is not a new character anymore, and that stylistic choice had previously been used to hype up the mystique of him as a new character, doing it this time is reflective of Emily's blossoming attraction or infatuation with him because of all these emotions she has towards him, because he is going to publish publish her poetry. I also really like the dialogue they had, even if I was stressed out the entire time, where he says that there is this romantic quality to him publishing her work. So it's understandable that she got swept up in her feelings, and she says to him that being faithful to your wife is an admirable quality. I know it still ended awkwardly, but it was good writing, and I will give credit where credit is due. There is a lot to get into with Emily's material, but first, let's knock some of the other characters out of the way. Emily's parents annoyed the hell out of me. How are you going to spend all of that money to go to the opera? Going to the opera is not cheap. And then you want to complain about the opera being in Italian? It's called La Traviata. What the hell did you think was going to happen? Also, they were calling it boring when the opera had just started. Maybe they're trying to get the audience to assume that more time has passed than it actually has, but they've barely been singing any of the music from the opera at that point when they're complaining about it being boring. Most of who was singing during the episode was Violetta, and she is not the only character with an aria or a duet in La Traviata. I don't even know if they bothered casting an actor with the specific character label of you are the one who is playing Alfredo. Maybe they didn't deem it necessary for what was being shot in this episode. But let me be very clear here. I've been largely complimentary when reviewing Dickinson season 2 because I think they've done a very good job. But this is the one time where I'm going to get very nitpicky about something because it really annoyed me. There is a huge continuity error in how they incorporated La Traviata into this episode. They showed everyone getting up like the opera had finished when realistically it was more like you had just watched the first act and then you're going to have an intermission. La Traviata has 3 acts. And the last one ends with Violetta dying. And at that point, she is not wearing a ball gown. She's usually in a white, flowy, old-timey nightgown. I did not see Adelaide May, the star of this production, wearing anything on that stage except for a ball gown. Anyway, the parents were stupid, uncultured, irresponsible with their money. How is Father Dickinson going to be all grouchy to anyone and everyone over the Dickinson family being in a financial crisis, but somehow you have spare money to blow on tickets to the opera, and then you don't even stay beyond the first act? Boy, bye. At least my girl Lavinia has some culture. She was totally vibing, she was embracing the artistry, she was making the most of the experience, and seeing a new opera before it becomes a classic. The show is set in the 1850s, if I'm not mistaken, and La Traviata premiered in 1853. They have no idea that they are witnessing what will be an enduring classic. Now Austin and Sue. Yeah, that's getting awkward fast. You can tell that there's been a division that's been forming between them since the season started, and it's just getting worse. A widening chasm between them. What is with all of these pairings making me feel awkward and uncomfortable? See, when these two were involved in season 1, I think Sue did love Austin. I wouldn't say she was in love with him, but I think she loved him. And I think that he loved her, but they were young, and I don't think they anticipated that they would grow apart into different people with different values, even if you didn't have the issue of Sue being in love with someone else and possibly being not into men at all. I don't know what the show's interpretation of that particular situation is. I don't know if the real Sue Gilbert was what we today would classify as bi, or if she was just not into men at all, so I'm not going to assign her any of those labels. Putting all of that aside, she is not communicating with him. She's using all of the wrong coping mechanisms that are putting him off because he wants more from life than these shallow things, and he cannot force her to open up to him if she doesn't want to. It's just a messy situation, and it's getting worse with every passing moment. There is plenty more to get into in future reviews about their relationship, but not today. Now, let's get into the meat of this episode. Emily, the opera, and Adelaide May. When you see Emily having such a strong emotional reaction to watching La Traviata, it makes sense. You have an emotional roller coaster of a love story, star-crossed lovers being torn apart by outside forces, and it ends tragically. They have that horrible fight, and then Violetta dies, and when you hear the music of La Traviata and it's performed with that story, it's really an emotional gut punch. And a person like Emily, she's so passionate and open to the arts and taking in a new experience like the opera that she's deeply moved by seeing this story played out. The show doesn't explain that well because you don't even see Violetta die on stage. I don't know, maybe they were worried that Americans would be too squeamish about the tragedy of an opera like La Traviata. I have no idea. So she goes backstage using Sam's press pass, and right away we start to see what sort of material the episode is addressing about the experience of being a professional artist. The supporting cast members are all really interested in being able to get some publicity to help put a spotlight on their work, but the big star is content to hide away because they're already a big star. What do they need this extra press for? Emily goes into Adelaide's dressing room, and we get the excited newcomer meeting the jaded veteran of the arts. Emily has just had this extremely profound, moving experience of art and the power of storytelling. There are so many layers to the conversation these two have with each other and the commentary of what they're saying. To Adelaide, this is just another day on the job. She's been on what is presumably a grueling tour. What's another night of doing a show she might have done hundreds of times by now, especially when you factor in all of the rehearsals that you have to do before you go on stage for a live audience. Adelaide has become desensitized to the power of art because she's done it so many times, and she's now being weighed down by the less glamorous parts of being a successful working artist, let alone a famous one. She talks about not being present when she's performing. She tells Emily, "You just saw the most moving performance, and I felt nothing." This is very much a job to her now. She's going through the motions, but she's skilled enough that that's enough, and the audience can still be satisfied. Meanwhile, she is losing her grip on reality. She doesn't know what's real anymore. She's disillusioned by fame. Her throat hurts. She doesn't want to sign autographs. The fans are overwhelming to the point that it can feel like they want to kill her. And that's not an unreasonable thing for her to think either. If you think about it, plenty of public figures have been stalked, terrorized, and even died because of their fans. Adelaide represents that tragic loss of your passion for your art, but also very reasonable things to be affected by as a professional artist and as a famous person. It's exhausting. It's not always fun or glamorous. She also mentions the critics. She said, "If you're seen, you're exposed. Everything that's exposed goes stale. The critics will put you on top for a minute, then they'll drag you down. They hate you because you made them love you." Really think about that for a moment. How many women celebrities have shot up in popularity only for the court of public opinion to turn against them because of no real reason whatsoever? Remember when a bunch of people just all of a sudden decided they didn't like Anne Hathaway anymore? Maybe some of you watching this are too young to remember when this happened, but that was a thing that happened. But just to be very clear here, don't lump me in with those people, because I have always shown nothing but respect for the Queen of Genovia. This is a particularly common issue that women celebrities face. But Emily has this unbridled enthusiasm and passion for what Adelaide has done in her performance. That's why Adelaide finds her charming and invites her to go up on the stage with her. It's the same genuine love and passion that a lot of us as viewers of art feel when we find a work of art that speaks to us. A lot of you watching this review feel those deep emotions for Dickinson as a show. It's about when you find art that is not only done well, but it's also art that speaks to you on that deeply personal level. And this is where we get back to La Traviata. So there's a line where Adelaide is telling Emily about the critics and the audience in general, that court of public opinion. She says, "You were a courtesan, they fell for your trick." And that's an important line because it draws a direct parallel to La Traviata because Violetta is a courtesan. When Emily was watching the opera, she experienced this vision of Sue being on stage, singing one of Emily's poems. This is not just happening because Emily has been in love with Sue since episode 1 of season 1. Or before that, but that's the first time we as the audience got to see it. Emily was moved by La Traviata because Adelaide May is a great singer and performer, but also because of the story of La Traviata. Now, I'm going to explain more about the story that I didn't get into last week because of spoilers. I'm building on what I said last week, so this is why I told you to watch that review first if you have not already done so. In La Traviata, Violetta and Alfredo are happy, in love, but they are torn apart for a number of reasons. Violetta has secretly been selling her belongings so that the two of them can live happily together in the countryside. When Alfredo finds out all of this, he leaves temporarily to go take care of some financial things because he doesn't want her to be the one pulling all of that weight to provide for them. He wants to do his part. While he's gone, Violetta meets Alfredo's father, and he implores Violetta to break up with Alfredo because her reputation as a courtesan is threatening his daughter's engagement because it's the 1800s, and reputations are so important that they can mess with engagements. And also because shaming sex workers was even more popular then than it is now in 2021. Violetta decides to go ahead and break up with Alfred even though she loves him because she doesn't want her reputation to ruin his or his family's. Walk through this with me. A deep, burning, passionate love that is deemed forbidden because of reputations, the antiquated social conventions of the time, and it all ends tragically. Of course Emily was going to relate to that story. Of course Emily was going to hallucinate her on-again, off-again girlfriend on the stage. They're both really silly reasons to be ashamed of a relationship, but it's the 1800s. Why does Dickinson resonate with its audience so much? We have women protagonists that are deep, complex, flawed characters that are full of heart in an industry where a much higher percentage of stories put men in the top billed roles. We have a complicated love story between two women in an industry that far less frequently allows LGBT plus love stories to be told than hetero love stories. When you can reach an audience in that way through art, you make them feel seen, you make them feel valued. Emily and Sue do not speak about their romantic relationship out loud as much as the audience probably wants them to. But Emily has just watched this opera that tells a story that pulls her back to something she hasn't been focusing on as much lately. Yes, she wants to be published, she wants her poetry to be seen, she wants to be remembered, but she also wants love. And who does she love? Sue. However, before you jump into an all you need is love chant, let me finish. I hate the expression, all you need is love. That is some rich people nonsense. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a thing. Instead, what I am drawing from this episode as the main takeaway is that you, the heroine of the story, should be able to have your cake and eat it too. Your poetry is your passion, you want to do it professionally, you want the world to see and hear you, you should get all of that. You also happen to want a girlfriend, you should get that too. Women should not have to decide between the career they're most passionate about and romantic love. Women are often forced to choose between the two, and that is a load of nonsense. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Don't look at me like that. I said I was going to have a lot to say about this episode. One additional detail I want to compliment that really did not fit into any of the larger points of discussion in this review, but I want to mention it anyway, is that I really liked that Adelaide May's nose contour was really dark on stage. See, when you do stage makeup, you have to apply it more liberally, shall we say, because you need people that are sitting all the way out there in the audience to be able to see the lines of your face. It's completely different from the makeup you would wear to just go out for coffee with your special person. Since this is a television show where the camera is going much closer to the performers on that stage that are doing La Traviata, I was not expecting to see anything resembling stage makeup. It was a nice surprise. That's a really geeky detail to appreciate, but if I'm feeling geeky, that's that. If you stuck around this long, thank you. Hopefully you got something out of my long-winded rambling. I know I'm very long-winded, but I did say I was going to have a lot to say, and hopefully some of you will find an opera to enjoy and if not an opera, some sort of art that makes you feel that way. I promise that not all operas are melodramatic and tragic though. Watch Die Fledermaus. It's the best one. It's not in Italian though, it's in German. A lot of operas are in Italian or French, but Die Fledermaus is in German, and it's chaotic and it's hilarious. Anyway, like and comment to help a small content creator get boosted in YouTube's algorithms. Subscribe to keep up with more of my Dickinson reviews that will be coming for the rest of the season. There is so much drama left to get through in these next few episodes. We are not even remotely finished yet. Also, if you stick around, I'm going to be posting my spoiler-free review of Dickinson episode 7 very soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!